headphones. So I think everybody should be able to see us right now. Lily will tell us.
Of course she will. Hello, Lily.
For those of you who are, hey, Sophie, for those of you who are Prosecutor Podcast fans, we just got the note from Brett that said at 9:30 Eastern Time, 8:30 Central, they're going to be doing it live. So Allison and I will do our best to not, speak like William Faulkner.
No problem. No. Yeah.
What is it? My dad sent me a funny one today. What was it about? It was about we were talking about he's listening to the Audible version of Ulysses. So 3 guys, about 3 Dubliners, right? 3 guys, all just one day of their life, and 734 pages.
Wow.
I'm going to try not to do that.
No, I think, it reminds me, I took a Western Civ class in college, and the professor, all he did was he was an elderly guy, so I respected him. He sat at his desk the whole time for 2.5 hours and just read from this Will Durant tome of it was a wonderful book, but all he did was read from the book. It was the whole class. That's all he did, was just read this book to us. And I'm like, I learned a lot. So
Right?
I'm like, I mean, admittedly, he could have been a little more engaging, but the book was good.
So do you have vintage villains swag on? I was very tempted.
I don't yet. I don't have my swag yet, but I will. I was trying to decide. I like that color. So I was waiting to see what everybody else was ordering, and then I was going to order mine. So, and also I want to make sure I get the right sizes. So
I have a black one, which looks stunning for those of you in the bonfire vintage.
Nice.
I am sporting all Silver Linings Handbook.
Oh, yeah.
Made by one of my awesome listeners.
So, are we revealing them?
Well, I guess we are now.
I'm sorry. Well, this is our inner circle here. It's all good.
Yeah. Sure.
I love her, though.
It was by Sophie. She is amazing.
Yes. I wasn't sure. I'm like, oh man, was I supposed to share the name of the artist? Oops. So, look at her. She's laughing.
It's on the wall right there.
Yeah.
I tell everybody about it every bloody podcast I do that's live. I love it. All right. Anywho.
All right, guys. All right. Are we ready? Are we ready to do the history thing? Okay. You guys be ready for Jayson. Jayson is on fire today with this topic. And
I'm half asleep.
You better wake up, my friend. Oh my God.
Half asleep is like everybody else's wide awake.
Hi, Carly. Hi, everybody. I would see it. This is the problem. I see the chat and I'm just going to want to chat. All right.
Well, that's okay.
This is my first live. I don't know what I'm doing. All right.
Trust me. No one knows what they're doing.
Yeah, it's all pretending, right? Pretending we know. So, oh yes. Are we ready? Let's do this thing.
We're recording. Go for it.
Okay. This week, I took my time machine back to the early 1800s, and I found a very bad lady. While the United States wrestled with its own soul on the issue of slavery, even going so far as to federally ban the import of slaves in 1807, the demand for free plantation labor continued to soar across the antebellum South, and many were intent on acquiring it by any means necessary, even by kidnapping free blacks from cities in the North and smuggling them to places like Louisiana and Alabama, where they were often never heard from again. Hop aboard, and my guest and I will take you to meet a woman named Patty Cannon, one of the main conductors on the reverse Underground Railroad. Trust me, Harriet Tubman, she ain't. On today's episode of Vintage Villains. All right. Let me scroll down here.
Go,
this is the great thing about being live, right?
This is the part you guys don't see. We're like, oh shit.
This is where I edit. Mm-hmm. Welcome to the show, everybody. Yeah. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Allison Dickson, and if you've been following the episodes in any order, you'll be fresh off the coverage my guest and friend Jayson Blair and I did on one of the bigger heavy hitters in vintage villain history, John Wilkes Booth. And during that series, which naturally led to discussions of slavery, he brought my attention to someone a little lesser known in mainstream discussions of American history, but who is every bit as loathsome, if not more so. And today, the two of us are joining forces once again to tell you all about her. Patty Cannon and her gang of human smuggling and murdering outlaws spent more than 20 years roving the Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia countryside, kidnapping an estimated 10,000 free Black citizens and selling them to plantations across the South, and murdering the ones they couldn't sell. But before we get there, we need to do that vintage villains opening ritual and take a short trip on the Zeitgeist Zeppelin so you can get a snapshot of what things were like at the time Patty and her gang were terrorizing people. But because the events of today's episode span over more than a decade, I wanted to focus on a year that would do the most heavy lifting in terms of creating an underground market for slave trading. And that would be the year 1808, when a law passed by the US Congress the previous year banning the import of slaves went into effect on January 1st. It was literally called the Act Prohibiting Importation of Slaves, and Thomas Jefferson had called for its enactment during his 1806 State of the Union address. Since the late 1700s, a trend toward the total abolition of slavery really began to pick up steam. Lest anyone think slavery was just widely accepted as a given in this time, all of the original 13 colonies had already instituted some kind of ban by the time the federal law came around, though a couple of them, looking at you, South Carolina, had reversed that decision and were still bringing in boatloads of people from Africa. And I should note, the federal law did not prohibit the trade of domestic slaves, and that's where we start running into trouble that you'll be hearing about today. In March the same year, the United Kingdom had also banned slavery throughout its colonies, and they sent its Royal Navy to the west coast of Africa to enforce an abolitionist blockade there. So the tides were greatly turning against the practice the world over, but that did not mean everything was suddenly hunky dory for those who'd been stolen, bought, and sold. Oh, God, no. More on that in a few. Elsewhere in the world, though, humanity was at peak pugnacity. And if you're into colonialism and imperial ways of life, you're in luck. The English were still holding a grudge over their ass kicking in the American Revolution, and they were finding all sorts of ways to undermine our newly won independence. We'd be duking it out with them again in just a few years with the War of 1812, and this would become even more of a certainty with the election of James Madison, Thomas Jefferson's main constitutional bro, as president that November. This is also the year Portugal set up its colony in Brazil in order to escape the French, who'd taken their land. And speaking of France, Napoleon Bonaparte was also a very busy man. The phrase Napoleonic Wars is especially applicable to this time period, forcing King Ferdinand of Spain to abdicate the throne so Napoleon could give it to his brother, Joseph Bonaparte. This would effectively end a war that had been going on between Spain and England because they would then need to join forces against Napoleon in what would be known as the Peninsula War. Meanwhile, Russia is at war with Finland. Denmark is at war with Sweden. Honestly, Europe was just this big old tangled cat's cradle of embattled kings at this time. But when you consider just how much money and resources these countries were rolling in when they started colonizing across the globe, the stakes became even higher to grow their empires and hold on to them. And that almost always, of course, means war. In other highly consequential discoveries, though, chemist Humphrey Davy became the first to isolate several elements we now take for granted, like sodium and potassium, as well as strontium, boron, and others, making himself the founding father of electrochemistry. In Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, anthracite coal was first burned as fuel by businessman and landowner Jesse Fell, thus beginning the use of coal as the key source of fuel for America's coming industrial revolution. RIP Planet Earth. And legendary composer Ludwig van Beethoven put on a marathon benefit concert in Vienna, where he gave the first public performances of what would become the key works by him, including Symphony Number 5, Dun, 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 dun. That's all the singing I'm doing today. Symphony number 6, Piano Concerto number 4, and Choral Fantasy. And no, I am not singing those either. And a symphony is probably the best way to describe this period of time that Jayson and I will be discussing today, not because it was pretty, in fact, far from it for a lot of people, but because there was so much going on. And in fact, it's playing a bit like the rehearsal for a much bigger piece. Much like you heard in my recent Balgunnis episode, where you saw what was happening in the world exactly a century later in 1908, we're in another similar prelude period here. In 1908, it was the brief respite before World War I. Here, it won't be long before the people of this time witness the rockets' red glare and the bombs bursting in air we all sing about at our sporting events. And that war will have a direct impact on the topic we're discussing today. So I hope you are all ready for some thick and fascinating American history. Jayson Blair of the Silver Linings Handbook, my friend, is here again as promised, and he brought with him reams of knowledge on Patty Cannon, her stomping grounds, and so much more during this tumultuous period where we would soon discover as a nation what we were truly made of. If you're watching this on YouTube, he even put together some visual aids for you to check out later. So pop on to either the Silver Linings Handbook or Vintage Villains YouTube channels and check it out if you like. And if you're a Patreon member, hello, you're watching this live as we record it as we speak. So I cannot thank you all enough for your support and for joining tonight. And that's it. Let's jump into the Patty Cannon canon and get this show on the road.
All righty.
All
All right.
right.
Where shall we start?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, so many
J
spots.
Jayson, I would love to start with you
Okay.
because, I mean, you co-hosted on my, John Wilkes Booth episodes,
Mhm.
and, f such a fantastic wealth of knowledge that you have just in the area that you were born and raised and have lived most of your life, where so many of these events took place, and you mentioned Patty Cannon to me in that first episode. I'd never heard of her. And when you told me what she had done, I was blown away. But I'm curious, sort of your background and what brought you to the knowledge.
I've always been a history buff. Grew up in Maryland, right? Or grew up partially in Maryland, Texas, Georgia, Virginia, a bunch of places. But two of them being key, Maryland and Virginia here. And really, I have always been a history buff. I've been fascinated by history. I've been interested in it. My mom used to joke that the reason why I got C's in my history classes was I was like 30 years ahead of wherever the history class was. I didn't always get C's, but she did make that comment because I was constantly reading it and reading history books and fascinated, I think, in the idea of, I think something very early on in life, being able to see how we repeat our mistakes over and over again
Yeah.
really left me very interested in one sort of like what what mistakes exist in history that we're poised to repeat either because we don't know history or we're not able to translate it into the present. So, with that being somebody who grew up in Maryland, which a lot of people don't think of as a part of the South, but very much is, growing up in Maryland, growing up in Texas, growing up in Georgia, Civil War history and education around these things were always a sort of deep topic. And we've talked about the idea, you growing up in the Midwest probably didn't get as much Civil War stuff
Right.
as we did. So it was always a fascination. And now Patty Cannon in particular, I had, when I was younger, I had heard nursery rhymes and other stories about her. And I was really, as a local, as somebody who grew up in Maryland, went to the University of Maryland for college, kind of did a circle around the South and came back. I was really interested in the intersection between, the North and the South. And, I know when I went off to college, I remember going on this reporting trip with Heidi Sherman, one of my college classmates who's Jewish. And we traveled out to the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And we traveled out there because we were working on a story about the Chesapeake Bay and one of the islands there. But as you move south on the Delmarva Peninsula, like things like the number of Confederate flags you start to see like rise, and It feels
Yeah.
very Southern. And we went into this one grocery store, and it not grocery store, excuse me. It was a convenience store for a gas station. And it was just filled with Confederate memorabilia, Confederate shot glasses, Confederate flags, Confederate whatever. It was the most awkward moment probably for the two of us as a Jew and a black guy. But we got
Yeah.
our gas, we got out of there, and I bought a Confederate flag shot glass.
Ah,
So
that's a power move, my
I,
friend.
well, I just felt like it should be awkward for them, like it's awkward for me.
Right.
So so the first place in my life that I really in the North ever saw sort of like that Confederate presence. And Maryland, my father grew up in South Carolina, in the deep South, pre-civil rights movement, during the civil rights movement. First place he ever saw the Ku Klux Klan was in Maryland.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people with our modern liberal Maryland have misconceptions about it. And then, so in the 90s, when I was in college, there was a show called Homicide: Life on the Streets, which I've been
Ooh,
rewatching recently. And it's
yes.
about these David Simon, the
Love
creator of
him.
the creator of The Wire. Well, he was a
Yes.
former Baltimore Sun reporter, and actually he was the editor of the University of Maryland student newspaper, the Diamondback, a couple years before I was the editor. But David, created Homicide: Life on the Street, and they had this one episode that I saw while I was in college, which was it was called A Woman Named Patty Rindhauer. And
Mm.
basically, skipping through, it's a great episode, but skipping through the episode, they find this white guy chained and whipped to death in the basement of a Baltimore row house. They're trying to solve the murder, and they come across this. They find out that his family descended from this woman named Patty Rindhauer. Patty Rindhauer was a stand-in for Patty Cannon.
Oh,
And so that's how I was really exposed to this idea of Patty Cannon, this fugitive slave hunter who was running around Maryland capturing people. And the whole idea in this was one of the descendants of a slave that she had sold into slavery came back and
right.
killed
I'm
her
sure there's a
relative.
lot of ghost stories sort of surrounding her.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But then when I opened the
Yeah.
book on it, like, forget it. Like, this is gonna sound crazy, but like illegal slave trading was like some of the polite stuff she did.
Yeah.
She was clearly, I mean, and we'll talk about this, but she was a straight up serial killer, right?
Yeah.
She not only captured runaway slaves, she also captured free blacks in cities like Philadelphia, both blacks who were born into freedom or who had earned their freedom, and took them back down to places like Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, um, to meet the demand that was created by the fact that you could no longer import slaves.
Right.
So if you think about historically kind of where we were at that moment that you were talking about in the beginning, once the importation of slaves stops, at a time where agriculture and the needs of plantations are growing.
Yep.
Yep,
Yeah.
we don't have the cotton gin yet. We're not able to sort of like, it's still being done by hand. It's going up. So what slave owners have to do is your slaves can no longer be as disposable, right? You
Right.
can't throw them away or put them into retirement and teach them to cook or do whatever, or laundry. You have to keep them in the field. So that's one aspect of what's happening there. And slavery is becoming more brutal in that sense, in
Yeah.
terms of the age piece of it. But you can't afford to lose your slaves. Your threats to losing your slaves are death, another slave plantation owner stealing them, or someone stealing them. And so weird to talk about like stealing people because it's
Right.
just
When we talk about this, I
yeah,
find, because a lot of people know I've been rewatching Narcos, and I have this obsession with the drug trade or the cartels and whatnot. And so talking about
same
people like
thing.
talk about cocaine or talk about, some other product that is being traded, and realizing that these are human beings that were ripped from their own families,
Right. But they
in
were
their own
products.
country and brought, yeah.
But for a good segment, they were products, right? They were
Mhm.
property. Um, even though it was against the law, you were unlikely to be punished for for uh, selling a free black person into slavery, but what you would be punished for was stealing a slave from a white plantation owner.
Well, yeah, because
That's
that's
where
his
because you're
property.
taking their property, right?
Right.
So anyway, back to that thing. The big thing that's happening during that time, essentially, is it puts, without the ability to import in slaves, it puts a greater focus on keeping slaves from running away to the north and finding other ways. So the Fugitive Slave Act, which was passed, I think it's 17, I'm going to get it wrong. It's like 1790. Well, there are two of them, but the
Yeah, it was
first
in the
Fugitive Slave Act,
1790s.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
1793, I think. So the Fugitive Slave Act is passed then. That is designed to implement, for all of you who are originalists and want to go by the actual words of the Constitution, in Article 4, Section 2, Clause 3 of the Constitution, it required the return of escaped slaves to their owners.
Man.
Clarence. But so I got to get a Clarence Thomas jive
Yeah,
in.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
anytime.
so the idea there is the Fugitive Slave Act enables that element of the Constitution, and it allows people to not only hunt slaves, but later in its iterations demands, puts a duty on law enforcement and government and others to capture fugitive slaves and return them back to the South. And this was just a supply and demand problem. But what was happening in the black market, right? In the black market, free blacks were being captured. And there's that great movie Stolen that came out. Was that a couple years ago? It talks about the free blacks who were captured and
Yeah.
sold into slavery. So that increases. And so Patty is a part of this licit and open hunting of runaway slaves, this illicit capturing of blacks. But what really makes Patty special is she was also killing slave traders who
Yeah, she
came up,
wanted their money, right? Well, that
and
was
their
the main
slaves,
motive. And the
and their
slaves, 'cause
slaves,
she
and
it's
their
sort of
slaves.
like when somebody, robs a trap house to get the
Mhm.
drugs that they then turn around and sell. She was in that
Right.
same trade. And you and I were talking about this last night when we were just going over notes and everything, is that this is that specific class of criminal, the kind of criminal that is up for the ultimate danger level. They're going after anybody and
Absolutely.
everybody to get what they want, and they tend to be much more brutal and cruel and impulsive and a lot of those other things that I think describe Patty and a lot of the accounts of her.
Well,
Um,
and you're right, right? Like high risk taker, willingness to take risks. She was very charming and charismatic, highly manipulative, like straight
mhm.
out of the psychopath handbook. But what she also was very explosive, because as we walk through the story, we're going to find out she kills a lot of people she didn't need to kill. She didn't need to kill them
Yeah,
for money. There are some people who believe that she killed one of her own daughters. She
yeah,
killed a number of children for crying. So some element of this, her desire or her lust for death, goes well beyond
for
financial
sure.
motives.
And it's
So
interesting because she let one of her daughters at least live to adulthood because it's really when she starts doing, gang work, like getting her gang together, the Cannon Johnson gang. Wasn't the Johnson part of the gang, that refers to her son-in-law and, that she had done a lot of that stuff
second
with?
son second son-in-law. Yeah, it was her
Yeah,
second son-in-law. And I think you're kind of leaning in a big point. Patty was not the only one doing this.
yeah.
Um, in the history, I'll go ahead and throw up sort of
Oh,
like
yeah.
this visual.
Visual
If you
aids, everybody.
Right, right. So these are the most prominent paths to the Underground Railroad. And the Underground Railroad had actually, in reality, was not an underground railroad. It was just the name of it. But it really started in the 1700s. And in that initial route, it was
Mhm.
from the South to Florida, essentially to Spain, to create avenues for escape. Once Florida, becomes no longer friendly to slaves traveling through it, all the routes start to move north for the Underground Railroad. And it's most prominent, even though it existed in the 1700s, it most prominent between 1810 and 1865. Toward the tail end, famous people like Harriet Tubman are a part of it, and other things along that line. But little sort of talked about is this reverse Underground Railroad that existed.
Yes.
And on this map, we're just really highlighting the main routes that Patty took. And what's really instructive about it is she's operating in the border state territory and has some unique advantages based on where she is.
Yes.
So, for those of us who are on YouTube, you can see this. And for those of you who aren't, you can go grab a map of Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia and take a look at it. But on the highlighted counties that you see on there are what's known as the Delmarva Peninsula. So it's a peninsula that's essentially between, on one side, the Atlantic Ocean and the Delaware River up north, and the other side, the Chesapeake Bay and the Potomac River. You could argue tail end, but it's really the Chesapeake Bay. And so the blue counties to the west are the Maryland counties. The green counties are the Delaware counties. And the orange counties to the south are 2 counties in Virginia. Where Patty operated was essentially on the border of 3 counties, 2 in Maryland, 1 in Delaware. And one of the things that her particular gang used was being able to hop from county to county to county. But one thing I want to flag for you, Allison, you mentioned her son-in-law, Joe Johnson.
Yes.
And this is generally where they operated, right? So the Mason-Dixon line is at the top of Maryland. A lot of people don't know the Mason-Dixon line turns down and separates Maryland and Delaware, then goes out. But you mentioned Joe, but it wasn't really Joe where, a lot of sort of historians have debated, do we overemphasize Patty because of her gender and the fact that seems strange or different? Was it really Joe Johnson, her son-in-law, who was leading it? But in reality, Patty was robbing people and capturing slaves before Joe Johnson ever married her daughter. She was doing it with his previous husband before his untimely death.
Yes. His untimely death, wasn't that a possible poisoning? There was some speculation that she might have killed her first husband.
Yeah. Well, there's her first husband. Then there's her daughter's first husband.
Oh, her daughter's first husband. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's lots of death in this story.
Quite a bit.
Yeah, a lot of death. A lot of death in the story. So it's just one of the things you have to keep in mind too about Maryland and Delaware is, Maryland was a slave state. Delaware was a slave state, but it had started to fall out of favor, right? But this border that we're used to, or at least that I'm used to, between Delaware and Maryland, even though it looks like a straight line, there was enormous debate during the time. Going back to Charles Calvert, Lord Baltimore, and William Penn, who was in charge of the colonial colony, the border of Maryland and Delaware was ambiguous. There's one instance in the late 1790s where a sheriff from Dorset County, Maryland, crosses over into what other people said was Delaware to collect some taxes, starts a shootout, he gets killed. This group of people, these slave traders, including Patty Cannon, took advantage of the border lines,
that mushy border,
like Israel Keys, right? Like you kill a person in one state, kidnap them in one state, kill them in the other, bury them in the other, right? Same thing. Every time people would sort of come onto them, they would just hop the border and travel.
And this is well before we had any sort of federal law enforcement apparatus. So these things going on in early America that sort of, when the borders aren't fully set and there's still that whole thing being worked out, I imagine just had to be a bit of a nightmare from a jurisdictional perspective and a law enforcement perspective because, well, was there any real... I mean, there were sheriffs and there were local police, but I mean, nobody directly enforcing
there was law enforcement, but there was. There was.
But I mean, they were there to catch. Go ahead. The runaway slaves.
They catch slaves. Yeah. Right. That's what they did.
Yeah. And so in order for people to, in case we hear people that say we're going to politicize the police and all that, we're not here to do that, but we can't ignore the early history of what police were designed to do in this country.
Yeah.
And it's such a complicated thing to even talk about because we already know slavery is abhorrent. They knew it was abhorrent back then. That's where they're trying to abolish this stuff. And it's just interesting to see sort of the people that I'm losing track of my thought here. I love
Mhm.
being live. This is awesome.
Yeah. No, it's the same thing. We just cut it out.
No, I mean, we'll cut it out. This is why you guys get to sit and watch the raw, and
They
whenever it
love
comes out later,
they love this part.
this will all be cut out. But I mean, it's just
Well, I
we
think
can't let that stuff go.
yeah,
It's an
well, and I
important part of
think
history.
we're getting at the point. This is one thing you'll get constant debate about this, and I caution people when they take the perspective that, oh, it was just their way of life,
Yes, yes.
or it
Mhm.
was a different time in history and we've progressed so much. Like, do your history. If you
Yeah.
go back to the 1780s, 1790s, 1800s, there are a ton of people who are super progressive on slavery, more progressive than Lincoln was, more progressive than we are
Mhm.
on it. And I mean,
The Quakers.
on yes, the Quakers
Shout
as an
out to the
example.
Quakers.
But even as we'll see in this story, there's some people in the deep South who are very much against it.
And I
So
wanted
I was
to
going
Oh,
oh,
I
but
wanted
I
to
would
mention real quick
yeah.
too, Thomas, in the chat, he, mentioned before, 12 Years a Slave, was as another example of, this practice, in
Mhm.
action. I think you said it I don't think that's specifically based on a specific person, but of that experience, yes, if you wanna get an
Yeah.
idea of what that was, like, that's another movie. And also, yeah, he mentioned, yeah, the roots of current police harken back to slavery. Absolutely. I didn't wanna leave those things
Oh,
going because
yeah.
I saw that
Yeah.
in the corner of my eye. Um, but yes, there were a lot of progressive people at work, and on the Facebook, page, the Vintage Villain Soiree, I posted a screen grab of something published in 1805. It was basically a pamphlet that talked about, the horrors that we were doing to the slaves that we were bringing over here. They were very aware of what was
Mhm.
going on and the wrong and how wrong it was. So I think it's really important to establish that because there are way too many people today who are trying to put a smile on slavery and say, "Oh, we trained them and gave them jobs, and no, we didn't fight the Civil War over that." They're really trying to erase those things, and we have to be delicate when we talk about some of this stuff. Yes, there is nuance, but let's not lose sight of the fact that we're talking about human beings being bought and
Chattel
sold. So,
slavery, much nuance there,
yeah, yeah,
right?
and
Ultimately.
yeah, Lincoln definitely not as progressive as we think he was. I mean, in the sense that we talked about this, Jason, in the Lincoln in the John Wilkes Booth episode, where he suspends habeas corpus and he's doing all these things during the war that would reinforce the idea that he was a tyrant to the people that were fighting him. But yeah, but Lincoln was trying to do the right thing ultimately, I believe.
But there
So
were also many people before. So
yes,
let me scene set for you maybe.
yeah,
So we're talking about the Delmarva Peninsula, right? So it's a
mhm,
combination of the vast majority of Delaware, the eastern shore of Maryland, and then the eastern shore of Virginia.
yeah,
So it's about 170 miles long, about 70 miles wide at its center, 12 miles wide at its shortest part. I mentioned it's bordered by the Chesapeake Bay on one side, then the Delaware River, Bay, and the Atlantic Ocean. So you've got big waterways around you. You've got the Potomac River near you. You've got the Chesapeake Bay, which leads out into the Atlantic and then straight on the Atlantic. And you have the ability to cross the bay into a slave state of Maryland. You also have easy access to Pennsylvania and northern cities. So it's a great location to sort of spirit off people and hide them because Delmarva is still today and was then very different than the rest of, let's say, Maryland.
yeah,
Highly rural, very agricultural, different culturally, very Catholic by background. You can still go there and see churches from the 17th century that Catholic churches that are still operating. If you look at its history of even before then, you had the natives who lived along those islands who were pushed out very early,
Yeah.
eliminated very, 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 very early. I mean, we betrayed the Native Americans in terms of, or the natives. I don't even want to call them Native Americans. That's not really fair. But we betrayed the natives immensely in those areas, creating treaties, pushing them out, all
Right.
for this agricultural operation. And so you're in, and I think it's hard to imagine this, a highly rural, highly agricultural, great spot for transportation that's
Yes.
also lawless because of its border. It's like a criminal's heaven,
It
right?
it really
Like,
is and they wouldn't have to go too far south. Like, they would be able to kidnap these people, put them on a boat. Would they float them all the way down, or would they meet people along the way? I mean, what was the chain of custody looking like in terms of
well, so
grabbing and
it was different, but once Joe Johnson became a part of it, they would actually sell them themselves. He would
Okay.
literally go on trips, sell them along the way himself, not hand them off to other traders. And that was just really a profit margin thing. And the gang was big enough that at different points, 30 to 50 people, that's a group of people going down to sell slaves wasn't going to stop their ability to operate up north. So, Patty walking into all of this, like, there are two different versions of the Patty Cannon background story. One is she was a local Delmarva girl who grew up there. There's another version of it that I think there's probably a little bit more historical evidence for, that somewhere between 1759, 1769, actually in Canada,
Mm.
near Montreal, she's born. And her family, the story behind her family getting here is that actually her father, L.P. Hanley, was actually from a wealthy family in England. He married somebody that they didn't want, or his father didn't want him to marry, disowned him. He goes to Canada. And as the story goes, their family gets involved in smuggling along what they call the North Country, which is northern Vermont, northern New Hampshire, and then the Montreal area. Long story short, Mr. Hamley, untimely execution after he killed somebody who was going to supposedly turn him in
Oh,
for crimes he was committing. Right? It's a family trait here.
I was gonna say
Um,
this is a great family tree so far.
yeah, I'm telling you, man.
We're
Hey,
establishing.
at least they're on brand, right? They're staying on brand,
Yeah.
because also Patty's brother was executed for horse stealing later. So yeah, the family's really on brand. Um,
Wow.
But so imagine this, poor Miss Hanley, right? She's lost her husband. She's got a house full of sons and daughters that she needs to now take care of. And so what she did was she turned a house into a hostel. And what they said was essentially that it was a house for people who were coming up to get away from um, the warm southern weather, but also a house of pleasure.
I see.
So, it served both roles, at least according to the version of the history that's probably most solid.
I had read that she had done Patty had attempted to do, some brothel type work, but her personality kinda didn't fit. She was a bit too surly. I think I read somewhere that she had
Yeah,
sort of a sour disposition. She didn't wanna do the
well,
sex work.
she was witty. She was a smart ass. She was
Yeah, yeah.
all the historical records suggest that she probably would have been really good at running a brothel, not so much
Right. Well, that was the
being.
thing. She had that aspiration, I think, to be a madam, but I think
Well,
you have to kind of work your way up the
yeah, but I
chain, you know?
think her mom was kind of doing that. Her mom was
Yeah.
kind of doing that because what her mom was doing is, as wealthy men came to the house, she would try to convince them to marry her daughters. And
Ah,
as the story goes, Jesse Cannon, a Delaware wheelwright, and those are the people who make or repair wooden wheels, comes up to visit the area, gets sick, and is bedridden. So Mrs. Hanley has Patty take care of him every day. And supposedly, what they said about Mrs. Hanley, I love this quote, that she exercised over the minds of men. Convinced him to marry, I love that quote, marry Patty and take her down to Delaware.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're sort of thinking of like the origin of this, it's sort of like a little bit of a shotgun forced marriage.
Mm-hmm.
But willingly wants to go with him. Patty moves down to Delaware, Maryland border, to essentially Delaware. Her husband, Jesse, starts what was known as the Cannon Ferry, which still runs today. It's called the Woodland Ferry. They've changed the name because they thought it was bad branding to have it named after a serial killer.
I mean, I guess.
Here or there. I mean, like, right, exactly. Right. So they go back to Delaware. They have at least one daughter. They're believed to have had 2 more children, right?
Right.
But then, so the way they describe Jesse, agreeable dude, large, attractive man, really loved her wit, the fact that she was charismatic, that she danced, that she was into music. But then, so they establish the ferry, but then Jesse dies, right?
Yeah.
And so what the neighbors report is that Jesse and Patty had started to fight each other, and Jesse's health then rapidly declined.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
The neighbors literally said that he died of grief due to the relationship falling apart. But years later, to a priest, Patty would confess to have poisoned him.
Yeah, yeah. Patty went on a bit of a confession spree, which we'll get to in the end there. But I find that there are a lot of figures that we see throughout history and true crime and whatnot that love to hear themselves talk. And so once they start to get in that sort of mythologizing self-narrative kind of thing, H.H. Holmes was known to, which is why you don't want to believe many historical accounts of what H.H. Holmes did, because most of it came from his own mouth. But
Yes.
now I wanted to ask you too, your sources that you read for this. The Entailed Hat was one.
It's a fictional account of it by a guy named
Yeah.
Hal Roth. Yeah.
Yeah, there are a few, and so finding details on Patty is a interesting uh dive. It does require to really get into some actual hard book reading, from what it sounds like, because
Yeah, the
the
best
online accounts kind of vary.
Yeah, the best yes. There I mean, part of the problem is that the story became prominent and uh you know, it became prominent through a pamphlet that was written where they didn't use the real names. Like they called Patty Lucretia Cannon, they called Jesse Alonzo, but it was a very somewhat hyperbolic, maybe not as hyperbolic as people thought. But there is a second book that's really key. It's sort of like the gold standard for Patty Cannon research, and it's called The Monster's Handsome Face.
Yeah.
And it's because people said that Patty had a handsome face.
The paintings of her out there there are a couple that I've seen that they are depictions of her that are from these fictional accounts. They're a little creepy. There aren't any real portraits of her that we were able to uncover quite, but the handsome description was the one that I kept seeing pop up, that she wasn't exactly like she didn't look like a monster, but I I often wonder, like, who would play her in a movie. I've been doing the research on this. But anyway, the what I find interesting too is that a lot of these historical accounts being fiction, it sort of reminds me, if we're thinking of a contemporary equivalent, people were writing about crimes back then, sort of the way like Penny Dreadfuls or some of
Mhm.
these
Yep.
blown up accounts, and it's almost like watching these days like a investigation discovery kind of true crime show with a lot of bad reenactments. That's sort of
Yeah.
the modern day
Yeah.
equivalent of what was available back then.
They would write them, yes, exactly. They would write them like the sort of half fictionalized documentaries that we do on true crime, sort of like grabbing the most salacious details, the best
Mhm.
rumors. So, but
Yeah.
in recent years, a number of historians have really tried to like slice as much as they can, um, between the sort of fact and fiction of it.
Yeah.
But one of the things that happens after the untimely death of Patty's husband, you alluded to this before, we talked to about it before. One of the daughters marries a man named Henry Brereton.
Mhm.
And he was supposedly the one who introduced them, although some accounts suggest Patty was already doing it before him, to the illegal slave trading.
Yes.
So there's here or there, um, which one was responsible for sort of starting it, but it's very clear that Brereton and Patty are working together, in slave trading by the time her daughter has the the by the time her daughter's first marriage has happened. And one of the real interesting things that I spent time researching, Allison, was this idea of like, was it really weird for a woman to be involved in the illegal slave trade? And what I found was that the answer was no. Richard Bell, who's a historian, had made the point that the illegal slave trade after 1808 and the ban on the importation of slaves gave women a real opportunity to sort of leverage familial and other relationships, with sort of like all sorts of people to sort of break out on their own and have some independence and control as men were doing other jobs
Right.
that were more official. So what you find during this period, and we were talking about Marie Delphi, uh,
Oh, Madame
Right.
Lalaurie.
Yeah, Madame
Yeah.
Lalaurie. A lot of women during the time were interacting a lot with slaves, whether it was from the illegal slave trade or it was like actually managing the slaves. And you can tell that her story, but she was essentially a New Orleans socialite who was a serial killer,
Yes.
who tortured and murdered a unknown number of slaves in her house. But people call Patty the northern version of her, although I think it might be backwards. I think
Yeah.
that
And it's really sad. This is kind of a messed up way to put it, but I think too, maybe part of this is that when you're talking about like or when you look at the time, like the social hierarchy of the time, I think women found a foothold in doing stuff like this to slaves because it was almost like women could finally be like, wow, there's somebody actually below me on the social ladder that I can abuse. And then it just becomes this sort of like, I don't know. I think there might have been a little bit of something like that going on where there's certain type of powerful, rich women, just like men, who find that, hey, I can get my jollies here hurting other people. If you're already inclined to being a violent, murderous criminal type,
Mhm.
it's just really funny. Like, yeah, women finally had a chance to be the murdering people, the murdering violent criminals that their husbands were.
Yeah,
So
right, right, right.
it's kind
It's
of
like,
messed up, but
well,
it
it's
is,
like the same thing that, during World War II, as all the men went off to war, it opened up jobs in factories for women. Same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Just serial killer style. But
Right.
the but but the thing about it is, and I see we have a good question about where the bodies ended up, and we'll definitely get to that. But one of the things that happens too during this point, I'm glad you brought this up, is that there's also a gender bias at play in the sense that just like in New Orleans, in New Orleans, the only reason she got caught was because
Mhm,
her house went on fire, and then the fire marshals came and
mhm.
found a 70-year-old Black woman tied to a
To
stove,
the stove,
right?
yeah.
Who then pointed them to where all the bodies were in the attic. She just basically said, people go up to the attic and never come back. And they
Yeah,
found
there
all
was
the
a
bodies.
really interesting recent series on her on last podcast on the left, that I, recommend if you want a good background on Madame Lalaurie. But yeah, it's interesting that we call her people think of the Madame Lalaurie first. But you're absolutely right. I do wonder if it was
Yeah.
it had it the
Well,
other
but
way
the
around.
rumors about her were going on forever, and the rumors about Patty were not going on forever. And there is historical documentation that basically says that there were times where Patty was not prosecuted, nolo prosecute,
Mhm.
because of her gender.
Right.
Because they didn't believe it, or they didn't want to do the prosecution. Unclear on which one it was. So basically, you have those rumors going around. It's 1811, and Henry Beerton is arrested and
Mhm.
starts serving a prison sentence for kidnapping probably white people's slaves.
Right.
So he escapes from jail in Georgetown, Delaware, which is like the one of the county capitals. After his escape, he reunites with Patty, and they launch this um, plan to sort of ambush this slave trader named Rigel, who is
Yeah.
who is staying. And this is one of Patty's favorite things to do. She would like wine because she was charismatic. She would wine and dine people, fill them with food, ask them all sorts of questions, get them laughing and joking, find out whether they had money, slaves, or what their setup was. And with the Rigel situation, they essentially let him leave, kept him there, gave him more free drinks, let him leave. One group, along with Patty, went ahead of him, knocked down a tree to block them. Another group went between them, right? And basically tried to kill them. They did a terrible
Yeah.
job,
They're
horrendous job.
they're
They
not
killed
great at
one guy,
yeah.
two got away. At this point, they're not great. They get better.
Yeah.
But what eventually happens is Beerton is caught, and he ultimately will be executed at, later down the road. But what that does is, after he's caught, that forces Patty to really move out on her own.
Mhm.
And so one of the things you then see happen is she starts to build um her own sort of independent gang, and a key part of that is Joe Johnson.
Yeah.
So when we were looking at the map, if you go here, you can see right here on the border of Sussex County, and I think, is it Caroline County or is it Dorchester? I forget which one. Um, you have Patty's house in Reliance, Maryland. Literally right across is Joe Johnson's tavern.
Yeah.
They would keep the slaves or the free blacks that they captured primarily at Patty's house, in her attic, in her cellar. They stopped using the cellar once it was filled with too many bodies that from people that she'd killed, but the attic and then the rollover space was Joe Johnson's tavern. Now, the tavern's main purpose was to sort of wine and dine the slave traders to try and ambush them, but its attic was also used to store slaves. Because when you're talking about 3 to 10,000 slaves over a 20-year period, you are running a factory. You are running a
Right.
factory. So they are in Patty's house, in Joe's house, and then they would frog march them from Joe Johnson's house or from Patty's house down to what's in the middle of the map in front of us, which is the location of Cannon's Ferry, now Woodland Ferry, and they would take them down the Nanticoke River out to the Chesapeake Bay. And one of the things that they would do is they'd have to frog march them all day, right? So what do you do with the slaves that you've left before the ship has gone down the ferry? There was an island outside of where the ferry was, and they would tie the free black slaves, whoever they captured, to the trees there. And that's when they would do their survey. And their survey was figuring out is this person sellable? Is this person going to be problematic somehow? And according to the history, if they found that they would be problematic on some level, they would either throw them in the river or kill them and put them in a building called Cannon Hall that was there.
Mm.
At the same time, Patty also could not stand the sound of children crying. And so one of the real famous pictures of her that was in that magazine, which I think do I have it up here? I don't think I have it here, but it's on the cover, is of her holding a black child in front of a fire. Well, apparently that child had been screaming, and she grabbed the child, she walked it to the fireplace, scorched the child in front of the fire. It was mortal wound to the point where it burned her own hand.
Wow.
And then buried that child in the cellar. And that wasn't the only child that she killed.
Yeah, because they found
the one that she killed
several.
over crying.
Yeah, they found a couple of dead children on her property.
See what I'm saying? There's more than profit going on here.
Oh, absolutely. She just seemed like someone who was an opportunistic killer. If she could kill someone, she would kill them. If they inconvenienced her, unless they could make her money, that was the only real path. Now I wanted to ask. Now I mentioned the War of 1812 sort of being a factor in this earlier, and I see it here in the notes as well. So we're not going to discuss the entire War of 1812, obviously, but the conditions of that war were such that the Americans and our native allies basically went back to battle against Great Britain.
And their native allies.
And their native allies. Yes.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting conflict, but what it essentially did was it opened up even more of a pathway, right, for Patty and her gang to get the free blacks and the slaves down to the Carolinas and the Deep South. Is that correct?
Yeah, and a big part of it, if you think about it, it's their geography, right? During the War of 1812, if we jump back and take a look at, let's say, this slide, if you look at the Delmarva Peninsula, and if at the Virginia part that's sticking out, the British would send ships up the Chesapeake Bay. They would stop those ships and require everyone to prove they were an American citizen.
Yes.
If you were a slave or you were someone who was not an American citizen, they would free you. And this is a part of their harassment.
Yeah.
But they stopped at the mouth of the Nanticoke River. So that allowed Patty's group to bring people down by the river, either go through the bay or break further down on the peninsula or cross over into Maryland. So that river and the fact that the British did not go up the river also gave her a competitive market advantage.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And speaking of that market, I was really fascinated by the economics of the situation, because when they banned the import of Africans for slavery, the remainder, what tends to happen, obviously, whenever you ban an import, is it makes what's here go up in value, starts costing more. And so the price of a slave back then was $1,000, and that currency worth about $22,500 today. That's still kind of disgusting in terms of, like, that's all a human life is worth, is $22,500. Anyway, but
I'd pay people $22,500 to stay away from me.
There is that. But I find it really interesting, though, because there were other states, right, that weren't they kind of like South Carolina was still trying to bring people in.
Yeah, there were other states, right? So
yeah.
there were states that tried to break it, but you also have to remember the Louisiana Purchase, right?
Oh, yes.
So New Orleans was exempted for a while from the ban on imports, the slaves. So they were still able to bring in slaves. It was done illegally, but you have to, I think the thing to realize about the War of 1812, obviously this is going on illegally, quote unquote. That gave the British an opportunity to harass the Americans
Yeah.
about it. It allowed them to free slaves, right? But I think an important thing to look at it is, if I'm Britain and I'm competing against a country that has enormous agricultural and other resources, that has a free labor force, it's going to
Yeah.
be harder to beat them. So if I can free that labor force.
See, this was the thing that I was wondering, and one thing I wanted to ask you
Oh,
during the
you're
research
wondering
was,
whether the
am I being
British were
cynical?
being noble?
Am I being cynical here? Are they, when I noticed that Great Britain had abolished slavery in the same year, I was like, wait, are they trying to offer competitive packages? Like, who is your better leader here, the Queen or the King? I'm sorry,
Well, but
or
look, I mean, you have to look at it like, look at what's happening in Haiti and the Caribbean and other spots
mm,
like that, right? You
right?
essentially have in the Caribbean slave revolts happening, and people are
Mhm.
captured by those on islands, and
Yes,
and the British start to have much less land that they can cultivate using slavery. So slavery becomes less to their advantage, and
right.
it's highly to the Americans' advantage. So if you're competing with the Americans, there's a great advantage to slavery going out of favor. You're not going to beat them one for one anymore.
Right,
So
right. That is
yeah.
very interesting. Um, and so with all this going on, then of course, and this again, this happened, this is all taking place over about 20 years. Is that right? Is about
Mhm.
how active long Patty was active for. Um, so she was able to really capitalize on the market and the war and everything that was going on. And now with the War of 1812, was there any like active fighting like going on in the country, or was the war mainly kind of
Well,
out,
yeah, I
you
mean,
know?
you have
So
no, 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 no. I mean, the war came to DC.
it came to DC.
Right,
Okay, you're
18,
absolutely
yeah.
right. You're right.
Mhm,
Okay.
mhm,
This is a war I have not studied as much in depth as like the Revolution and the Civil War. So
mhm.
I've been trying to backfill a couple knowledge gaps on this one. Um
So
as we've been going. So
The White House was burned by the
yeah,
British in
that's right.
1812 by going up the
The
Potomac.
the original
Mhm,
White House, that's right. It did
yeah.
burn in the War of 1812. Um so the reverse underground railroad that they were doing, that was what stayed active for a long time, but they were doing other gang activities as well, right? Because like you said, they were killing other slave dealers. They were kidnapping people and bringing them south, but they were also getting them from Philadelphia. And that's who I wanted to
New
kind of bring in,
Jersey,
New Jersey. Yeah.
Philadelphia.
Because
Yeah.
you had mentioned Henry Brereton was he was kidnapping other people's slaves, right?
Yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
was going on to other people's plantations and stealing their slaves, which is
Or
incredibly
their homes
dangerous.
if it wasn't as yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right, and not just kidnapping free people, but I mean that and not just robbing slave traders who were transporting slaves, but also just going on to the plantations and taking slaves. Um,
And you see
but
less of that in the history of as the gang evolves, they start to get out of
yeah.
the business of, or the gang itself, once Joe Johnson and Patty are running it, are no longer doing that.
And what's interesting too is I had read that they also utilized, within their gang, black members or members of mixed race
Oh,
as sort
yeah.
of decoys. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
if you wanna put somebody you're trying to kidnap at ease and you have black people in your gang, then they're gonna not maybe not feel like they're as much in danger, but that was part
There's
of the
Yeah, so
lore.
that's definitely a part of it, right? Like, you're trying to lure people into kidnapping. It helps to have people who can tell you of great jobs or opportunities or whatever it is. But it also serves another purpose, just like with the murder of Emmett Till in Mississippi in the
Right,
1950s, is you have built-in fall guys ready too. There were
right,
two black men who were a part of that group that went with them. It's historically, you will see that the slave traders inevitably had some black servants or whatever you want to call them
right,
somehow
right.
involved in their work. It served many utilities. And what they would do, and this is part of what led to her downfall and her capture, is that, you know, one of the guys who worked for her, and I'm trying to remember which of the two it was. I think it was Cyrus. 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 I can't think of Cyrus's name, but one of the black men who worked for her would go to Philadelphia, would charm both women and men, and would attempt to get them to come to jobs in other places or spots where they essentially would get kidnapped. And so that was essentially the way that eventually Philadelphia gets involved in the case. But there were others who would travel across Delaware and do similar things. There were others who would do similar things in New Jersey. So this
Right.
group, Western Maryland, Western Pennsylvania, very expansive. They had a very expansive reach. And ultimately, that reach into the northern states and the ethics of some people in the deep South are what lead to their downfall.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's just incredible what they were able to get away with, is going through a lot of the sort of gang activities that you had written down. You'd mentioned the child in the fireplace, and then there were travelers that would come to the tavern. I think you mentioned one that she had stabbed him in the heart with a dagger. And other people had walked into the house during the killing, and she caught up with them and threw him on a table that had dishes on it, covered him in the tablecloth and thrust him into a chest in the room, then called accomplices who robbed him and took his body on a small boat into the river. So
Yep.
this is just but one night hanging out with
Example.
Patty Cannon. This is
Ye-
what happens.
Yeah, there was one that she allowed to board a slave trader board in her house, and
Mhm.
there was a secret passage. They came up and they clubbed him. She clubbed him.
Yeah.
There's another example of somebody who was at the tavern, another
Mhm.
slave trader who was at the tavern, and they seated him by a window so
Mhm.
someone could come from the back of the window and stab him there. So, like people talk about like mere presence, right?
Yeah.
Like when there are like 30 or 40 people disappearing and it all seems to be around you.
Yeah. And,
Yeah, it
what's
becomes a little more
interesting
than mere presence.
is, the sheer body count of killers from from earlier eras is astounding. I think mostly because it was harder to get caught, probably back
Mhm.
in those days. So people could just do a lot more killing before. And and this is of course well before we even knew the term serial killer was a thing. But it's utterly fascinating to me that this woman had a house full of bodies, and um and you just look at this sheer body count aside from all the kidnapping that she did, responsible for the death of probably over 10,000 people indirectly or
Disap
directly,
Yeah,
disappearance.
disappearance.
I mean, a lot of these
Disappearance,
people
death.
that were sold, now there were
Coulda ended up.
people that were recovered, and I do
Yes.
wanna, bring that up because there were people that she sold down the river, literally, that did get recovered, and that was thanks in large part to the mayor
Of
of
Philadelphia,
Philadelphia.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So our friend Mike Ely, Just Legal History,
Hey, Mike.
check it out if you have not seen it,
Yes,
folks. He's got
and I
his
gotta get it,
YouTube
yeah.
channel.
I'm on an episode, Jason's on an episode.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah, that's right, that's right, that's right, that's right. Brett
Yep,
from
Brett,
the
that's right.
Prosecutor's on episode. He's got lots of really good guests. But he asked, where did he put the bodies? So when people ask me that question, where did she put the bodies? I have like one story that can give you all of the many examples. So there was this black boy who worked for her in the house, 15-year-old black boy. She became very suspicious that he was going to rat her out and
Yeah,
escape at some point. So he had been like a waiter and a servant in the house. And she really became, or he, the 15-year-old, appeared to become really, really uncomfortable once she burned that child to death that I was
yeah,
talking about before. So she became worried about him. So the gang basically went after him, beat him with a large shovel, right? Then
Mhm.
Patty took him alive, locked him in the cellar where she kept most of the dead bodies before they were transported out. Um, it also had skeletons of children that she had murdered down there, left him there for 2 days and 2 nights with no food and water. Then she came down and she asked him, she wanted to check to see if he was still alive, brought him a little bit of food, then asked him whether he'd inform on her. He pointed out all the other stuff and said, of course he would. And then she took a stone, beat him to death, buried him in the garden. So the answer to your question is in the cellar itself, skeletons. In the garden out back, there were bodies, and then another field there were bodies in. When she ultimately gets arrested later in the story, there were 20, I think, 21 people
Mhm.
chained up in the tavern, ready for transport. And then there were several, many bodies and a couple of people at her house. So,
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
I just wanted
Um,
to get that.
and yes, if you're curious, about how it smelled, it was probably terrible. I mean, you think about these houses full of bodies and whatnot. I think that there are people that just, I think if you're into killing that much, I don't I don't know that you necessarily notice or care. Maybe you like it. Maybe you just like being a
I'll let you
cannibal.
know when I start my next career.
I for one would like to keep it clean, you know? Um, but there were it just feels like an almost hopeless kind of situation, right? Because her victims are still largely not considered real victims at this point in time. These are
Yeah.
slaves or black people that don't matter to the white population. So nobody's going to take it seriously. This is how people have gotten away with serial murder for millennia.
Yeah.
Going
Targeting
after
populations.
people, sex workers, nobody cares about them either, right? So countless
But
times in history, you
something
know.
was changing, though. You
Yes.
have to, like, as
She
much
pissed off the
as
wrong people. You do something
well,
long enough, you're gonna piss off enough people or the wrong person.
although also some of it is the economic incentives, right?
Mhm,
So something
mhm.
was changing with the economics. As much as I like to beat up America, because I really do. If you want to get into a boxing match with me, tell me about this great country that we live in. I
Listen,
mean, look,
I wanna get in that fight too,
I
man.
love it.
Let's do it.
Yeah, we can duke it out. So, but part of what was changing, right, as you have more free blacks in the North, and slavery is no longer a part of what's happening in the North, they start becoming vital parts to the industrial economy. So, kidnapping free blacks from a state like Maryland or a state like Delaware is probably pretty safe.
Right.
Kidnapping them from a city like Philadelphia, where they're beginning to be seen a little bit more like citizens, is
Yes.
pretty dangerous.
Yeah, and
So,
Mayor Joseph Wilson, he was
of
getting
Philadelphia.
of
Yep.
Philadelphia, he was getting damn tired
Hmm.
of people from his city of brotherly love getting kidnapped.
Yep.
And it's really interesting to hear about a city mayor reaching well beyond the borders, not only of a city, but his several states, to reach his hand as far down as, Louisiana or Alabama or Mississippi to get his people back.
Yeah. You
And
basically had three key nemesis: Mayor Joseph Wilson of Philadelphia,
mhm,
John Clayton, who is in the US House of Representatives. He represented Delaware. He was later, toward the end of Patty's run, he was the Delaware Secretary of State. He was sent to the Senate after, and he was one person who had been fighting and fighting and fighting,
yes,
fighting to take care of it. He was a prominent, close associate of the soon to be President Taylor. And then the best part of the story to me, the Philadelphia part's great, but it's actually an attorney and a slave
oh,
owner from Mississippi that are the
I agree.
key to breaking the case. So,
Yes. John Henderson, correct?
yes, yes.
Yeah, an attorney for Hamilton, and later a US senator from Mississippi. This according to your notes that are wonderful, said that if the statements of his blacks provided accurate, they should be published so the people of Philadelphia, the quote, colored people of Philadelphia, could be guarded against similar outrages. Um, and
Yeah.
he was convinced of Johnson's guilt.
Do you want me to give you a
But
little background on how he got involved in it? I can give you
yeah, that'd
the
be great.
quick. Yeah, so in a town called Rocky Spring, Mississippi, there were 3 boys, 3 black
Yes.
boys, and 2 women who were offered for sale. One of the boys told the man, the slave owner, John Hamilton, that they weren't slaves, but they had actually been stolen from Philadelphia. So Hamilton sent for a Mississippi justice of the peace who questioned the people who brought them down. The people who brought them down, were there were several people, but one of them was Ebenezer Johnson, who was related to Joe Johnson. He produced a bill of sale for the blacks and agreed to let them remain with Hamilton until their backgrounds were verified. Enter John Henderson, who's Hamilton's lawyer. Meanwhile, Ebenezer Johnson, disappears. Well, you eventually find out that you're dealing with, they ultimately find out that you're dealing with people who are captured from Philadelphia. Later, they'll find people captured from Delaware who were sold in Alabama, people captured from, and these were children, these were women, these were men, and an assortment of different people. But really what spurred it was John Henderson, the attorney for Hamilton, reaches out to Mayor Wilson of Philadelphia and says, hey, we've got this problem down here of free blacks who are being offered up for sale. And every incentive in the world that John Henderson and his client had would have been to be silent and just let it happen in the background. But they wanted to adhere the law, or had some kind of moral conviction related to it. But basically Henderson gives them the advice to investigate it. They had no idea in that moment that they were unraveling. And, people talk about how it just starts with one clue. They had no idea they were unraveling one of the biggest kidnapping organizations in American history. And so Wilson follows his advice, which eventually connects him with Delaware's Attorney General, James Rogers, and also John Clayton, who, and the Attorney General of Delaware had tried previously to bring Patty to justice, because Patty had been arrested previously with Joe Johnson, and she had been released.
Right.
He was actually punished at the pillory. And if you guys have ever seen the pillory, it's like the thing where your head goes through the wood and your hands go through on the other side. The part that they leave out is that they nail your ears to the wooden part.
The little soft part of your ears.
Yeah. So Joe, like you can still see it in the newspaper where Joe was put against the pillory. And this was over a kidnapping, put against the pillory from like 10 to 4 on a day. Patty was initially charged with it, but the charges were dropped against her and others. So they're kind of onto her, right? Like they are onto her. But it really takes this guy, this slave owner with some kind of conscience in Mississippi, his attorney, and the mayor of Philadelphia to come together to finally get the resources that the Delaware Attorney General needs to bring this to justice. So at the time she gets arrested, we're at 1821 is when she gets arrested with Johnson. Johnson is the only one punished. In 1824, so they think at this point Johnson's now out of the business, right? But in 1824, a black woman named Hannah McCoyley files a petition for freedom in Maryland against Johnson and another man. So they're like, why does this person have a free black person? So then in 1826, Johnson fakes leaving the area, right? But is still active. And so really it's the period of 1826 to 1829
Mhm.
where Johnson is allegedly not there. Patty's in semi-retirement. There are all these stories, and there are these little newspaper clippings about her going to different Maryland homes where she's like entertaining the hostesses, telling gossip, amusing stories. She's supposedly in semi-retirement. But
Right.
eventually they find a number of records that suggest that they are still killing blacks. They're still moving slaves. And so, but what really causes it to unravel are a couple of different things. One of which was one of the people who were in Mississippi who was actually free was a woman from Elkton, Maryland, a black woman which is on the eastern shore, closer to the bay. And that caused the Maryland authorities to kind of go a little bit. So you have all these forces working against her and rumors spreading in the neighborhood. And so sort of the final thing is these forces are coming together and I love this, and you guys should take this as PSA if you think your neighbor has dead bodies in their house or something like that. The neighbors put together a group, right? And they
It was
basically,
next door. It was
yes,
old-timey next door.
the next door. And they pretend that they want to buy a part of the property, and they sneak on the property, and they basically convince one of her servants who's black, and they say they'll protect her if they let her down in the cellar, and they let her down in the cellar, and that ultimately leads to Patty's.
Oh,
Right.
oh my God. Wow. Yeah, because then they were able to get
If you see something, say
sheriff.
something.
A sheriff came out with a warrant and had about a dozen armed men,
And this
and,
is, speaking of border, this is so crazy that it's like the Maryland sheriffs are on the Delaware property. The Delaware sheriffs are hitting the Maryland property. Nobody knows what's going on.
it's a jurisdictional nightmare. I
Yes,
mean,
yes,
really, and
absolutely.
it still can be in that part of the country, I think, especially if you just think, "Oh, this was in DC." DC is not a state. What are you doing? Um, but
I
I
know where I'm
mean,
going now if I need someone to disappear.
right, right. But, what's interesting is that amid all of this, they find all these people, they find all these bodies. She was only charged with 4 murders at the
Yes.
end of it. So, I mean, really in our system, I mean, 1 will usually get you put away for life or hanged, in this day and age, that we're talking about. But she and the gang were all tried and convicted and sentenced to execution. Um, but, Patty didn't go out quite so
No,
simply, did she?
no, because Patty went out like in the same murdering way that she came in.
Yeah,
She basically started poisoning herself. That's what the historians believe. And she started poisoning herself, and like the way they started noticing something was wrong, like chunks of her hair were coming off, and then she started tearing her clothes off, and they had to replace them. And then she started biting anyone she could reach,
yeah,
and then she would get calm and be fine for a little while and become more composed. And in those composed moments, she started expressing remorse, right?
yeah.
And then and then she would go on one of her rages of madness again because she was probably poisoning herself again. And then back to remorse. In one of those remorse moments, she asked for a priest, and she confesses to 11 murders by her own hand and gives
Mhm.
accounts of them and says she's been the accessory to dozens of other murders, including the murder of one of her children, by who was 3 days old,
Yeah,
uh, by and then the poisoning of her husband, and killing two of her wealthy neighbors.
yeah.
The accounts suggest that the actual number is 24 or more, a minimum of 24, possibly more, um, by Patty's own hand, not to include her accessories.
Right, because, yeah, if you put in the accessories, I'm telling you, I'm getting some people with some pretty heavy body counts on this show. We have Belle Gunness, who had up to 40, it was believed, and then the Russian guy Vasily Blokin had 7,000 at least, and now her, Patty Cannon. So just to show, I think, how it only takes one person in a lot of cases to ruin a lot of lives, a whole lot of lives.
Jill, you are correct. This is gross.
Yeah.
And Lily, you are correct. She was loca and evil.
And Lily wanted to know, did she have any children with any of the slaves? Or, I don't know that we could know that
Not that
possibly,
not
but
that we know that she had children with the slaves. She did have her own children. And that's actually an interesting point, that local rumors that were actually, in the other version of the story, the non-Canada version of the story, the local version is that she was part mulatto herself,
yes.
or part native herself. Now, there's some people who believe that those stories were made up to um, disassociate her from them, but the intermixing of races in the South, as you can imagine, particularly as you got into areas like Delaware and Maryland, was quite high. So, like, I don't think you can rule out the idea that there may have been some self-loathing thing going on, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And so they don't know exactly where her body was. Now you have, they think that they found her skull, but we're not 100% on that. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Because,
there are two versions of her skull. These are the most prominent one, the ones that were in the. They used to take it out for Halloween in at the Delaware archives. So, but in the picture on the right of the lady holding the skull and looking into it is from it when it was exhibited. Someone sanely passed a law in Delaware that said you could not display human remains in the museum. So
oh,
eventually, this skull got sent to the Smithsonian. One of the funny stories is that a historian, I think it was in the 90s or something like that, I may have the dates wrong, but came in asking about Patty Cannon and was talking to the archivist about it, and who's the archives director. And he was like, "Oh, I have her skull right in here," and then just walked over to the shelf in his office, pulled out that little box, and then there was Patty's skull.
there have been a lot of laws passed about what various institutions can do with human remains. Like, there are books that are bound in human skin that the Harvard Medical School Library has in their collections, and there's a lot of problems surrounding having those things on hand. So that doesn't surprise me. Um,
Do we
that
have any future horror writers in the chat? Because Allison and I have a great horror book idea for you. Because if you go back here
Oh
to
yeah.
this picture, is Joe Johnson's Tavern, where they would like wine, dine, and stuff slaves. Well, apparently there is a house now built on the foundation of it. So
Just a
whoever
normal
those
looking
people are
house.
did not watch Poltergeist, and there is a great horror movie or book to be
They
written.
need to remake The Conjuring, I'm telling you. They need to remake it. Get those charlatan, uh, uh, that couple whose name, the Warrens, get them out of that. We need to reset it and put it on this property right here.
Right,
Because honestly, if there is any piece of haunted land in this country, it's gonna be right on that patch.
right.
I would think. It is interesting to see, though, that at least they're putting some signage up. They're acknowledging
Yep,
the history here in some
yep.
way. Because this story, which what I kept noticing over and over again as I was studying it, is that there's just not a lot out there. And what you have dug up for this episode, hopefully will paint a much broader picture, even going onto YouTube. I was telling Jason, I'm like, we're gonna have to like make this video public beyond this after this episode goes live as a podcast, because there's just no content out there about Patty Cannon,
Yeah.
really. Other
Well,
than,
and And it's really interesting to me too when we talk about things like the like we have these conversations about like, are there women serial killers, or are there many, or there are many notorious ones. If we talk about like, the motives behind things, I think we tend to flatten and simplify them,
Right.
right? Did Patty kill over money, or was it about independence, or was it about what happened to her as a child, or is it just because like she was a psychopath, or she was very
Yeah.
excitable, whatever it is? It's usually a wild mix of things.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that you have to look at, because I tend to come of mind that Patty was a serial killer first and
Mhm.
not a slave trader first.
Right.
Slave trading was a way to make money, get power. She's a psychopath. It worked for her. Serial killing was also her business. That these times in history where we have turmoil, look at something like the war in Ukraine right now, or
Yeah.
Hurricane Katrina in Florida, that is wide open ground for people, even if they're not serial killers, who want to do harm to other people. Like,
Right.
when we do not take care of each other, or take care of laws, and you can still see places like this now, inner cities, native, like the Navajo reservation during COVID. Those are wide open opportunities for people who want to do harm, whether it's killing or
Right.
something else, to do that harm. And I think there's an important lesson for us that persists into society today when we turn a blind eye to certain groups or populations,
Yes.
or look at some of these real politics things that we're doing in other countries, that we turn the blind eye. We're opening the door. I doubt there's many people, although there are probably some, who would listen to what they heard in this episode today and not find this horrendous.
Right.
But I bet if we did a real inventory, there's something that we're enabling or not fighting, just like happened in Rwanda or Bosnia or in Ukraine during the war,
Or what's happening
that,
in Haiti right
or what's
now as
happening
we
in Haiti
speak.
right now, is
Mhm.
it that is contributing to the
Yes.
exact same things that your grandkids or your grandkids, when they're getting this podcast thing on a chip in their brain, are going to be thinking are horrendous
Yeah.
100 years from now. So
Yeah,
anyway,
and also I found, looking back, and reading about these horrors that I'm reading on every topic that I'm covering on this show is, I found myself playing the Mister Rogers looking for the helpers, person, because I'm like, "All right, where's my hero? Is there a hero anywhere in this narrative?" Sometimes there is, often there is not. Um, I got some reassurance, I think, from the heroes in this particular story because, my God, there were so many who needed somebody. And this right here shows, like you said, that importance, I think, of us looking out for one another, and holding together that social net, and providing the basics for one another, so maybe we don't feel the need to rob and steal and kill, to survive, even, and trying to keep this sort of, or how about we just don't treat people like property? I think that would also be
it'd be
perhaps
a good
another
lesson.
great
Yeah.
moral of the story. But is that does that wrap it up for you, Jason? I mean, I know we had a lot of material here
Patty
and
Cannon could
everything.
go on forever for me,
Yeah.
but the I, I think in taking and looking back at some of these historical examples, it's fascinating, and that's one of the things I love about your podcast. But I would just encourage everyone to have a really broad aperture and
Mhm.
recognize that there are analogous things happening
So much.
today, whether it's in Russia or Canada or
It's
Mexico or
all over
wherever.
the world, and if you think a border is going to prevent the chaos in one place from spilling over into another place, that's not gonna happen, and history has
And
borne
my
that
my
out.
my border is the atmosphere. That
Yes.
little globe
The
is my
border
border.
is exactly
Mhm.
between here and space. That is our
And
border.
until they're aliens, and I will bring them in our border too. Well, until we find them or they find us. Although, I was listening to this really funny thing, this interview, and the guy was like, "Okay, if aliens did find us, why would they stop?"
Yeah, yeah. No, I liked Michio Kaku as one of my favorite astrophysicists, and the way when he talks about sometimes about how other civilizations would view us anyway. Uh, a lot of the prevailing theory is that they would just view us the way we view ants, in the sense that you just walk on them or by them. You don't really, unless they're getting into your stuff, you just don't
Yeah,
really think about them.
yeah.
Um, uh, but uh, but yeah, it's I hope to welcome every opportunity to examine history and find the parallels. That's why I love to do that zeitgeist, because it's like things that were happening then affecting what's happened in the broader scope often give you a slice of like why is this happening here in the closer up. So I want to do that with every episode, and I hope that if you liked today's episode that you will be back for more, that Jayson will come back for more guest spots, and because I just love this discussion, and I
Any
love
day.
the knowledge that you have to share on this topic has been hugely valuable to me, and I know it'll be very valuable to my listeners. And while you're waiting for the next episode, I hope that you will consider joining the Vintage Villains Patreon, or join Jayson's The Silver Linings Handbook,
Or
to stay,
both?
or both.
Is it an either or thing?
No, we're not in competition, man. We really should
No.
just, open it up and become
Combine
one big
it. Yes.
conglomerate. But
The
that's where you get to,
prosecutor, vintage villain, ding dong darkness, silver linings handbook, Santa
yeah,
maybe,
Santa maybe. I
Patreon.
mean,
Get it all
the
in one
kingdom,
package.
the kingdom is growing. Look out, Wondery. We're coming for
Mhm.
you. Um,
Mhm.
but there's but the Patreon is where you will get to stay up on more events like this, like live recordings. You can participate in the chats and have questions answered. And there's also this discussion over on Facebook at the Vintage Villain Soiree, where of course, you can also bring up new topics or post related things to what we're talking about here, and any questions that you have. And of course, you can also leave ratings and reviews over on Apple and Spotify. And finally, go and check out Jayson Blair's podcast, The Silver Linings Handbook. He is giving some of the best interviews that you'll find out there, period. If you love an interview podcast, seriously, where he'll talk to any variety of people and just get down into, what really makes them tick. You have a gift for that, my friend, and I think
Oh,
people
thank
need to
you.
go and check out your show. Um, and that's it. That's all I've got here for this episode of Vintage Villains. But now it's time for you all to go on and make good history, and I'll see you next time in another century. Bye. Peace
Thanks,
out.
guys.
That
All
was
right. See you
fun.
guys. Now get over to the prosecutors for those of
Yeah,
you who
we
are
only
there.
kept you over 9 minutes, right? So they're probably
Yeah.
only just getting started.
But we really, yeah, right. It's not even there. But we really appreciate it. We enjoy it. It's fun to do this stuff live. It's fun to take your questions and also get your ideas. And we really appreciate you guys showing up for stuff like this.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so should we do commercials?
Oh god, if we're gonna get to that point one day,
I'm
right?
Allison.
Yeah. Let's read us a HelloFresh ad right now. I love HelloFresh. But I'm not doing BetterHelp. I'm just gonna put that on right
No, no,
now.
no, no,
I hate
no.
BetterHelp. I'm
I
just
like Santa Maybe's commercials. Those are the best. Better Elf.
I wanna yes, BetterHelp works. If I do any commercials, I wanna ask if they'll let me do them like old-timey style, like they're being, read on a Victor, a photograph or
Hey,
something.
hey, hey, Lily's got a great idea. Adam and
Adam
Eve.
and Eve.
Adam and Eve. See?
I
That's a
will
good
take an
idea.
Adam and Eve
That's a
sponsorship.
commercial I would like to do.
I could talk about really Victorian era, sex toys.
Why is Lily saying sorry? What is wrong with her? Does she
Oh,
not know us? Is Ken
yeah.
yours? Is Ken the Ken
Yes,
who helps
Ken
with the
is
podcast?
mine. He is
Oh,
my
hey,
guy.
Ken.
Yeah, Ken
Nice to
did
meet you.
he did the music for the show, and
Very cool.
he makes sure that my tech works. He makes sure that I stay sane, and also that and he puts up with a lot of my shit because I'm having a bad week and I don't have much patience when things aren't working. So he's been very good helping me out.
Patience is
So,
what you have me for.
yeah.
Despite my many aggressive qualities, patience somehow was given to me. I don't get it.
No, you're
It's
good.
so I have enough time to line up the sniper scope.
Which car are we taking?
No, right? No match. Casualties. Yes, exactly. Which car are we taking? No, seriously, I called a friend today. I was joking with him. I was like, "You ready to go wheels up?" He was like, "Where are we flying?" He's not like, "What's going on? How can I help you?" He's like, "Oh, it's a Blair thing. I'm game." Those are the friends you need. You can be like, "Wheels up, dude," at fucking LaGuardia Airport in 1 hour.
Yes.
The words "Where are we going?" does not come out.
Oh, LaGuardia. I have such great memories of LaGuardia actually when I went to New York and right before my book release, I was flying back home and the lady I sat next to getting on my plane, she lives
It's gonna
in
be like the
Dayton.
first
She came
effing good
I was
memory from LaGuardia I've ever
I
heard.
was telling her, like, I just happened to bring up, "Yeah, I have a book coming out tomorrow." It was really the day before my release party, and she was like, "Oh, are you doing a thing? I wanna come." She actually came to my book signing, to my release party, and I met her in the LaGuardia airport. She just happened to
Oh,
Yeah, it was
that's
the
really
coolest
nice.
thing ever. I
Well,
couldn't
that's a
believe it.
cool story.
Yeah, she was great, and so I mean, I didn't have a bad time in LaGuardia. I mean, it's kind of a junky airport. I got lost, and it was under construction, and it needs work, but I mean, other than
Hey,
that
Lily, could you use that promo code for Adam and Eve to buy gifts for all of us, please? Just whatever you think we want.
I can't
Just
believe
take your
she's
best
over
guess.
here. Wait, have Brett and Alice done an Adam and Eve ad yet?
No,
Oh
no.
god, could you imagine?
She's just coming up with
They need to do one to fuel the rumors, continue to fuel the rumors that they're really a, secret couple.
yeah, instead of cigars for CrimeCon, Adam and Eve party favors.
Yes. Yeah. Add those to the gift
Just for
bags.
the record, Allison, I'm still recording.
This will not be on the podcast episode.
No,
So
it won't be.
this is the benefit of having Patreon access to the live feed. Yeah.
Absolutely. Anyway, speaking of which,
After hours. All right, go play with Brett and
people,
Alice.
we will let you go. Hang out with our
All right.
friends Brett and Alice. I will see you there eventually. Sophie, Lily, please play my role of talking smack to any crazy thing someone says in the chat until I can be there.
Oh yeah,
All right.
the enforcers.
Be good, guys.
All right, take care.
Take care.
That was fun.